Welcome to another broadcast of We're All Here Together. I got a really great question on YouTube that I would like to answer, but the guidance that I'm getting is to blank paper it. So I'm gonna, a later broadcast will speak to stripping away the layers that we learn through exposure to the media, our friends, our family, etc., that dim, hide, dull our real self. So, I would love to talk about it, but I guess not now. Okay, so what do we want to talk about today? That means this is a blank page broadcast. I'm open to things from the crowd, and when I tuned in advance, what I heard was the timing is always right. And I'm going to just start running in that direction, and again, I'm open to input from the crowd, questions from the crowd. What does it mean when the timing is right? I work with really lovely people, and I am always encouraging of them pushing back against what I'm providing, and also just kind of like brain dumping in general. So push back against what I'm providing as far as like insight, perspective, possibilities, and then I also encourage them to say like the craziest shit they can think of, because to me that is so incredibly healing when you connect with those things and you're face to face essentially, or ear to ear, or eye to eye, whatever, with some of your crazier thoughts. One, they lose some of their oomph. They're not so scary. And then when you share them with somebody that can receive them neutrally, you also learn like it's a way to unwind fear of the self. And why is that valuable? That's valuable because if you're afraid of yourself, you likely don't trust you. And if you don't trust you, there's a lot of things you're not doing that you probably would prefer to do, and a lot of things you'd like to stop doing that you won't or can't. So that's all to say that yesterday I was having a really great call with a lovely person, and we were talking about some of the cozier beliefs that and phrases that we pass around to each other. Phrases like, everything's gonna be okay, and it all works out in the end, and it's okay. And we talked about whether or not that's lying to yourself. And when we're looking at something like everything's going to be okay in the end, it does include assumptions and ideas that are invisible. So one is like, what is it? It's okay. What is that? Or I, what am I? Will I be okay? What is I? And then what is end? So there are ways that we think, and this is kind of like the basis of my work, where I'm sort of saying like, hey, wait, things aren't as bad as you think they are. Let's adjust some of the ways that you're interpreting reality so you can interpret it in a way that is actually not only more comfortable, but more accurate, which is probably why it's more comfortable. And so when we look at something like, will it be okay? It'll be okay. It'll work out. We say that to each other. We say that to ourselves generally. And I used to really lean on that. And it was kind of like my broken door in Titanic, rather than freeze out in the ocean. I was clinging to like, it'll work out. This has a reason. And later in my journey, when I started to unpack the unreality of all beliefs in specialness, there's nothing that's like more true than anything else at a language level. I looked at that one and I was like, wow, that might not be true. I might not know where this goes, or it might not go somewhere well. And what about the people that die or lose things or not recover? Like, was that okay in the end? And what I came to is, again, like when you unpack, like if you zoom in on some of the assumptions inherent in the language in the statement, like it, what is it? Well, to me, ultimately, it came to be like life, all of life. I am an expression of the body of life and a drop of the ocean. And the ocean's good, babe. Like, the ocean will continually recycle. I think of it also like Lego blocks. I'm built of Lego blocks that belong to the universe. I'll go back in the bin. I'll come out another way. Everything always contributes to what the overall body is doing. And it can't not, because it is like, it seems like life is self-writing in many ways. And I've talked about that in other broadcasts, which means that just kind of like the body will adapt, the environment will adapt, the overall body of life will adapt. And then when we look at the end, then that changes a little bit as well, right? Because is there an end? And we are conditioned to consider our personal story really, really high-pressuredly. There is so much emphasis on the individual life at this point in our culture, from my vantage point anyhow, that is not helpful at all. If you think about it, when we read a book, we watch a movie, watch a show, we're generally interpreting the story of an individual, and we've taken that idea that there should be like a work is almost like a complete, like a life is almost a completed soundtrack or album, and so the artist who has no fucking, you're learning the instruments, meeting other musicians, developing your unique style throughout the album. And so isn't it a little unrealistic to consider at the onset that you'd even have any idea how to lay out your album, especially if the landscape or taste for music is evolving as well, and also the tools that are available to do it. And so I think our kind of like slice of life, our little age bracket, and by our age bracket, I'd say, I can't really speak to like sub 25 because I don't know very many intimately. I don't think any at this point, but I'll say like 30 to 50. There's kind of this pressure to get your life right, meaning to make the perfect album, to have kind of like a through line that you are consciously aware of and guiding through the different songs. And while I believe there is a core essence, like a life force that flows through all of them, I don't find that many are conscious of what theirs is or could be, because you can't be. It transcends so much of our thinking. When we're thinking about the human experience, we forget that we're a part of it. And if you're a part of something, you can't really see it accurately. If you're a part of an organization, you can talk about what it's like to be in the organization. You can talk about what it looks like from within, but you'll never be able to actually see it for what it is and how it fits in the other pieces when you're a part of it, because you're too close. You can't see your nose. And I forget who taught me that, but I agree. I think that's really helpful to remember that when you're exploring, when you're self-reflecting, don't forget, in many ways, you won't see you. And so even if you sat down and wrote out all the pieces of yourself and tried to organize them, they're not going to be a complete list, because you can't see the parts of you that are behind the parts that you see, the ways that you see. And I know that this has been, I think there are varying degrees of people's ability to do that. But my point is that we experience, I think culturally, or at least again, this little age bracket, extreme pressure to know where our life is going and what it's going to be like, and to make it pretty, like Instagram filter coordinate songs. And for some people, maybe that's how it works. But for others, especially if some of your earlier songs required or inspired a lot of learning, you likely will have so much change from track to track that if you try to be consistent, you would likely be miserable, because the earlier tracks aren't things that you want to, like, they're not necessarily beats you want to keep with. And yet, the pressure that we feel to be consistent, to have the illusion that we're in control of ourselves, to think that we can kind of like craft so that at the end of our lives, we can turn in our sort of like our life timeline and say, like, isn't this like, it's in harmony, it makes sense, like, aha, the picture is complete. And I think that, there is a natural intelligence that will emerge that could be very beautiful if you're present to your life in a way that is, true to yourself, what feels good to you. You're staying in harmony with yourself, and you're being honest with the world around you, and you're attempting to approximate love, which to me means a mindset where rather than think that things are separate from you, people are separate from you, life is separate from you, you are including them as expressions of the self, expressions of consciousness. I think it is Neville Goddard or Emmett Fox, one of my old school metaphysician homeboys, who say that man's greatest delusion is the idea that there are causes apart from his own consciousness, something like that. And then I think Richard Rudd, the Gene Keys guy, and I love Gene Keys. If you haven't looked at it, I would. If you need more information on it, send me a message. He has, there's a part in one of the Gene Keys that talks about the greatest freedom is knowing that you aren't separate from life, something like that. And that is a weird belief to start to entertain at first. And I almost over-owned it. I think the best model is really Indra's net, and that, if you're not familiar with that, that is a Hindu imagery that says basically like consciousness exists in this web, this net, and at the intersection of the threads there are drops of water, and all the water droplets reflect back to each other, or there are gems woven into the intersections, etc. So the idea is basically like this thing that's not a thing, like what's being reflected, it's being reflected. It's quite trippy, actually. And from what I can tell, yeah, it seems as though our experience is a reflection of our own beliefs. That's why when I am presenting tools for what I believe to be self-mastery, which is in many ways just a reduction of unnecessary suffering, it's really about like, hey, what do you believe to be true? And beliefs aren't like, oh, I believe in UFOs. There's likely that superficial belief, the one that you can call out, likely sits upon several other ones that are probably in conflict with the top one. Humans are so crazy. We are so crazy and fragmented on the inside because there are so many information sources that are poured into us with competing needs and desires. And so our minds try to like come up with like, okay, go this way, but not that way, because, believe in this because you think it is true, but also be afraid of it and still believe that it shouldn't be. Like, so many of our pieces are in conflict, and that also contributes to the feeling of stuckness, because it's almost like you're giving your computer commands and the commands cancel each other out, and so you're just kind of like there. If that's you, there are a lot of ways that you can work through that. One is with somebody that can help kind of like tease out, who has a skill set to tease out those so you can bring them into your awareness. There might be information that's there for you. When we're looking at the self-reflection, we're coming to know the self. From what I can tell, underlying all the self is sort of like God. And then we have a stained glass window that is unique to each of us, and our stained glass window is beautiful, lots of different colors. You're not looking to be the pure sunlight behind it because you wouldn't really exist. So you want to allow for your individuality, your uniqueness, your stained glass window. And what we're looking at doing in the work is cleaning off the dirt on the window, what hides your unique beauty. And our culture, again, creates these frameworks where we judge things. So you might have a really fiery red on your stained glass window, and the culture says, like, you shouldn't be angry, you should be a nice girl. And so you kind of, like, cover that up or suppress it. And so the light doesn't shine through in that way, although anger and fieriness and passion can have a really beautiful place in the overall mosaic if they're interacted with consciously and embraced. So, I was running so fast. I'll just keep going where I'm going, and then I'll come back. Let's see, what was I talking about? I was talking about how we're individuals, God. Oh, the layers of influence, like what good morning, what inspires our behavior and the beliefs. So I was saying you'll likely have a belief, superficial, I believe in God, or I believe that people are good. And then under that belief, quite hidden, are these like fragmented, conflicting pieces generally, unless you've had a really, and it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. It can be interesting to explore because then you do see things from so many angles. One of the experiences I see with people getting to work closely with them in the work I do and just with the sensitivities I have is, and I was talking about this earlier in the broadcast, kind of a fear of self. And so if you think of yourself as a multifaceted diamond, so maybe you take the stained glass window idea and you fold it so it becomes kind of like this diamond with different facets. Each of us, the light hits it differently depending on where you're standing, what the circumstances and what is. And so the reflection, like the light from within, to me is the divine nature, and that image would generally be pretty consistent. When someone's light is reflecting off of you, which is similar to the Indra's net idea, what they are seeing of you is really a reflection of them. And that part can change. And sometimes when we're reflecting on ourselves, we see these different angles. And in fear of the self, it's like, oh man, how the hell am I supposed to drive this if I think I should go over there and I also think I should go over there? It's kind of like, for me, going through kind of like this mystical revolution, what I had originally been pursuing became no longer attractive. Why would I want to perpetuate a consumerist society that from a new vantage point was actually oppressive to humanity and not supportive of overall well-being and kind of counterproductive? So it's kind of like I had a drive toward material abundance, and then new information came in that was like, whoa, not quite what I thought. And so I oriented towards like, well, what is not that? Looked at nature. I'll live among the woods. Not really, feasible at this point either with the impact that I feel called to make. So the impact I feel called to make requires some level of access to material things, not because I think I have to save the world, but it's fun for me to teach. And so I trust that in some level, in some ways, correct for me. So these conflicting ideas where it's like, wow, like consumerism is not quite like, no. Material things that have put a lot of strain on like our, our disposable mindset puts a lot of strain on resources and also wrings out humanity in ways that are unnecessary, at least from what I see, and that people are like strained. The life is like squeezed out of them to create these things for us to dispose, which to me is very counterproductive. So it's like, why would I want to encourage and contribute and embrace that culture? That doesn't make sense to me. And then the counterculture really isn't feasible either, wholly at this point. And so what I allowed to come into being is kind of like, when I can make a choice that to me occurs as more sustainable and respectful of the whole, I will. If that's not available, okay, or it's not available in a way that doesn't take away from my overall experience. Well, I try to bring those two things together where I feel like I'm living in harmony with nature and humanity, and at the same time not, living out in the woods by myself. So those, having that kind of like consciously realized where it's like, wow, I really want to be successful, I really want to have an incredible impact. Again, not because I need to, but because that's how I feel called. And so I'll try. The idea is like, oh man, like how can I do that and that thing? And it looks like I just don't, it looks like at this point, while the worlds continue to merge, it looks like a lot of patience, it looks like a lot of open-mindedness where I allow for alternatives I couldn't consciously consider. So I really just kind of talk to spirit, and I'm like, hey, thank you so much, I appreciate it. I just kind of talk to spirit and ask at this point. When I find conflictions at this point, I basically just delegate them to my, like a larger version of myself, my higher self, angels, divine assistance, etc. And I'm like, look, this shit doesn't go well together. Can you help me coordinate? And then generally it's almost like receiving correspondence curriculum, where the next step, which to me is generally like an information packet, is revealed. And so you just kind of keep churning through it until it comes to a place of balance. And balance is so relative. It is a constant movement because things are constantly moving. Even if I came to a very succinct, this is what the balance of wilderness living and consumer, like this is what would be true for me. If I came to it on paper and said, the environment that this paper exists in, both of those worlds, continues to move. And so this almost becomes irrelevant instantaneously. And so balance isn't something that you have, it's something that you are. And to me, it's kind of like this teetering. And it's not even teetering, it's just a constant, it is a commitment to being as conscious as you can and to respond as authentically from the moment as possible, meaning and allowing that what is right is relative. From this moment, it might be right for me to do this. In this moment, it might be wrong for me to do that. And by wrong, I'd say like not optimal. And so if I'm holding fast to some kind of idea, some concrete I'm not able to make those nuanced choices, and that's how we come out of balance. And yet a free-for-all where you're just have no values, ideas, direction, etc., and responding to the moment from that place, that doesn't really work either. And so again, it's like even balancing those poles of having, direction, leadership, ideas, and none. It's a balancing act, and that to me is sort of like the middle way. That's what we're looking at when the yin and yang symbol, where it's the whole thing at once. And at the very point, the center of it is here and is now. And it's allowing for relative and personal correctness and how that is forever moving. And so if you're trying to identify yourself through your behavior, for example, and I don't know who this is for in my broadcast, but it comes in a lot around like, my foot fell asleep. Both. It comes in a lot to talk about like, we're conditioned to be nice. And I make this distinction of niceness from kindness and compassion, because nice sometimes is not that nice to you. And a lot of it includes what you perceive to be the other person's experience, or the ways that you have been even like conditioned to ignore their experience. Sometimes it's nice to act like you don't know that they're upset. Sometimes it's nice to act like they're okay when they're not. Like, is that nice? And so as a culture, we're trained to behave and respond in these ways. And what I'm saying with the middle way, responding in balance, is to give yourself permission to ask, like, what is correct now? And so what might be the nicest thing you can do is not engage with somebody. The nicest thing you can do might be to honor your own boundaries. Like, there is not a target that exists externally. They're all within. And if you're pursuing external targets, you'll likely feel very hamster wheelish, because that's not where that is not where the sensations you're seeking lie. You will never feel. And again, like, I recognize that there are certain physical conditions that can amplify feelings like lack of safety or danger, like war, lack of access to food or water, housing, etc. I recognize that those conditions exist, and barring extreme things, although I think these principles can be applied there, what we're looking for is safety, peace, etc. If you believe or associate them with conditions that are external, you won't find them, because shit always moves and you will feel very unsettled and unstable. I sometimes avoid a person because they look like a talker. It's accidental for the most part. So in some ways, I think there's like a judgment on your experience there, in that you perceive that maybe that's wrong. where it might be your being, the intelligence of your being, orienting you towards things that are more correct for you. And so that's what I'm sort of talking about with niceness, where we get this collection of ideas of what we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to present as a human, and most of them are like, they're convenient for capitalism, they're convenient for government, top heavy structures. They're not really that great on the ground. So that to me is kind of like the denial of individuality, where for me, like, the more that I relax into what's natural to me, as weird and inconvenient as it can be, the more I have access to personally, because I'm not lost outside of myself. So that looks like accepting that I interact with world and life from a kind of detached viewpoint. When I approach that, like, Shaylee, get in your human, like, you go down there and you care about the stuff other people care about. I don't. What I'm interested in is naturally being able to view these other vantage points and present kind of removed tools, that are like, hey, wow, when you step the whole way back out of yourself, you can see the language that is pinning you in the position that's not comfortable. So I would previously have told a story similar to you, where it's sort of like, well, I avoid people because I don't want to interact. I don't, no, I would have said, I'm avoiding life because it's been painful. And in some ways that had been true. And at the same time, it didn't need to be true for these other things to be possible. So we hold on to, we develop these explanations for our behavior, and those explanations are derived on what we're perceiving. And this is similar to what we talked about before. The perceptions, while they seem very factual, are actually still downstream from the expectations and beliefs that we have. I think it's the reticulator activating system, something like that. RAS is the acronym, and I think it's the part of the brain that filters experience. And so while I'm coming at this, from a more spiritual, mystical standpoint, at a neuroscience level, what I'm saying checks out, where it's like your brain will hold you to what you believe to be true. It will reinforce. It will just sort reality. There's so much stimulus at any given time. If you really kind of consider the amount of information our beings have access to at any individual moment, like in this room alone, all the sense data, like, whoa. And then if we expand beyond sense data and start to include, non-physical sensitivities and just like being connected to consciousness and all that is, like, whoa, that's a ton of information. So the brain is sort of like, okay, what story am I telling? What's relevant to my story? What do I need to, it's basically like sifting reality to give you the pieces it thinks you need to live the story you're telling. So, the beliefs that we have that really shape our experience are the ones we don't see. That's what I was talking about earlier, because they're how we see. So you can't see how you see. And they come from really like early pieces of our experience, and or are in some ways, genetically transferred. I don't know if that's scientifically correct, but in some ways they are transferred, and so they might not have those filters may not have been developed through your own personal experience. And sometimes it seems too like we are, as individuals, sensitive to collective issues, and those collective sensitivities are kind of like the gifts that we can contribute, and require some level of like, if something is particularly hard or blinks a lot in your experience, sometimes that can be an indication of what you can contribute by focusing on that topic, in your unique way. What can you contribute to the conversation? And it doesn't have to be the way I'm contributing or actually talking. It can just be through your own thought energy, because thought precedes physical reality. And again, like, I'm still kind of toying around with, do I want to learn the science words to talk about this? Yesterday I was thinking like, I don't really want to explain myself anymore. So I don't know, but I do encourage everybody again to find their own truth, do their own lab work, and if there's something that I say that doesn't bounce off science correctly, as in like what I'm saying doesn't check out, like let me know. I am happy to know that. Okay, so that is the end of today's informal chat. Next presentation, or some presentation this week, will be on removing the layers that hide who we are, the layers that we pick up through exposure to the media, friends, family, etc. And thank you to the YouTube person for making that request. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Okay, everybody have a beautiful day.